So back here again at this site, the more I think about some of these absurdities, the more, I guess, involved I become, for a bunch of reasons. And I think primary of which are two. One is that believing absurdities is dangerous for everyone. We should all pay attention when people float absurdities, ideas that just fly in the face of observed reality of our senses, and especially when they come from spheres, disciplines that have a lot of associations with profit motives, as invasive species biology, invasive speciesism, and the invasive species industrial complex does, right? The profiteering of the war on non-native species. Massively profitable industry, chemical warfare, largely industry. Spin-off from war companies, Monsanto, Bayer, all of these BASF, and many other chemical companies, which got their start in the first chemical war of World War I and then World War II. And the other primary one is that there's a group that's appointed itself, in charge of deciding what species are bad in the watershed I live in, and then taking it upon themselves to try to destroy these plant communities when no one's voted on this. There's been no public referendum. No one asked them to do this. The public never decided in a popular vote or in anything of the sort to do this. It's just a group that's self-appointed, and that's a very interesting and kind of chilling precedent. I mean, could I or anyone else listening to this just decide to go attack a certain plant, on public ground, and just say, hey, I don't like that causes this or that problem for me or my livestock or whatever ideas they come up with whatever supporting documentation they may have, and say, yeah, that's we're gonna start attacking these plant communities ourselves, without any broad scale public input, and also with no cost benefit analysis, just based on the idea that these plants are bad, and what we're doing is going to improve something, can improve something, and is going to improve the public commons, because this is in the public commons. I mean, this is in the river corridor on state land and town land, basically all of it. I mean, if you want to attack a certain plant community on your own property, it's your right to do so in this country, but to do it on public land should take some public input, right? Even if you're not using chemicals, even if you're just ripping up, making bare ground, causing erosion, doing clearly negative things, clearly negatively impacting the public commons, with the positive benefit being, that supposed benefit being dubious, at best, right? What they think they're doing, adding complexity and diversity, that outcome being dubious at best and later term, and the negatives adding to traffic on the roads, burning fossil fuels, driving all around the place, ripping up riverbanks, creating bare soil. Those negatives are guaranteed, they're already existing. They for sure cause these negatives. So anyway, there's other reasons too, but those are some really dangerous precedents that we should pay attention to. Here's just want to get they floated this idea, which I hadn't heard before, that knotweed has no fibrous roots, and so that's why it doesn't hold soil very well. And obviously it doesn't hold soil very well, otherwise how could it be right in the river corridor, which gets flooded many times a year, holding on to the ground when almost nothing else can hold on here. Obviously, it doesn't hold soil at all. How else could it be here? You know, it's amazing. When you believe something strong enough, you could say anything. I mean, we see that in all sorts of fields and topics, right? It's nothing new. So I'm just gonna put my phone down here and try to film this, this plant. Sorry, this is not my main, well, I mean, it is squarely my work, but I don't want to have to edit this a lot. So anyway, I'm just gonna try to do this on one shot. Thanks for your patience. Why is that doing that? Okay. There we go. All right, so I've tried to pull up a bunch of knotweed, even though I don't want to pull it up. I like knotweed. I used to hate it. Been working in ecology, studying ecology for 30 years, was taught to hate these plants, learn to love them, learn to realize their nature working, healing the damages that humans have caused, helping heal. They're part of nature, and nature knows what she's doing. So I don't want to rip any of this knotweed up, but I'm going to do it for demonstration purposes here. And this is the only one I think I might be able to get out of the ground because it's so small. So I didn't get the whole thing. There's still going to be knotweed here. That's why you can't eradicate knotweed unless you keep hitting it with chemicals over and over again in the same spot. But just by pulling, you'll never get every piece. And so these folks have floated the idea recently that there's no fibrous roots. Well, all the fibrous roots are being left in the ground when they pull them up. But if you actually get a bunch of it, and I'm sure they have, because there's many of them working on this, you could see it has plenty of fibrous roots. And there's another clip I'd share with you in this video that shows even more, because the knotweed got undermined, so it exposes the roots. So, you gotta wonder, I think these people believe, what they're rolling. I have no reason to believe these people aren't well-intentioned. They think they're doing good, right? I mean, how much destruction comes from people trying to do bad? Like, probably not most of it. I think most of the damage that people have wrought on the world, and some of the most even evil seeming things, destructive, horrible things, seems to usually be by people thinking they're saviors, they're virtuous, they're in the right crowd, right? They're the correct group. And but you do have to wonder, when they say things that are so absurd, like knotweed doesn't hold soil, like it doesn't have fibrous roots, things that are, like patently, obviously untrue. I think that's why I feel like that's one of the reasons I feel like this is all fibrous roots under there. It's just as fibrous as any other plant. I mean, and that's why I think one of the reasons I think it's so worth paying attention to this process, because it's such an insane, such a dogmatic process. It's such a fundamentalism. And I believed it, and I kind of was an adherent of it, to some extent for about 10 or 15 years, through college, and then, maybe for about 5 years after college, before I started working with land a lot, like every day, and just seeing how untrue the ideology and like the conclusions of the field of invasion biology tend to be. I'm not saying they're always wrong. For sure there's species extinctions on islands. Like, island biogeography has shown us that bringing like rats to many islands, probably most, is a bad idea, or pigs for ground nesting birds, right? Like, for sure. That causes extinction of those birds pretty reliably. Not a good thing. Not saying we should have done that. There's a lot of research out there that says that overall biodiversity tends to go up with species dispersions, which makes sense, right? You're just the way cultural diversity goes up in a place like the United States when a lot of different ethnicities disperse to a new land. It's very analogous. But I'm not saying there's not instances of diversity going down or extinctions happening, and I'm no fan of extinction. But this oversimplistic idea that is continuously floated by the invasive speciesists. It's speciesism, right? That's what it is. That it's always a bad thing is wild. And I find, another really interesting thing is that doesn't ever seem to be any Native Americans in these groups. It's always pretty much a bunch of white folks with extra time on their hands. No judgment, that's fine. I'm a white person with an extra time on my hands sometimes too. But that are leading the charge for this and are, rallying the war cries to attack this alien species. Check out Nicholas Rio's work, especially Anishinaabe Aki, which is an amazing paper he wrote. It shouldn't be considered amazing, really. It's just a very common sense, traditional view held by a lot of Native Americans, he among them, and cultures that he refers to, that think of newly arrived species. I'm not going to say in non-native, because that's really not ecologically accurate, or invasive or alien. That has a negative connotation. But newly arrived species, that they should be thought of like newly arrived peoples. No different, right? Just like there are relations, right? They're ancestors of ours. They're kin of ours. So groups of people that look at the world in kinship, relating in terms of kinship rather than like hierarchy, in a web rather than in like top-down arrangements, that they tend to look at these species, new species arrivals, with the way most of us, I think, accept that we should look at newly arrived peoples, which is with respect, with understanding, with welcoming, with a sense of how do we accept those groups into our world? How do we help them get by? How do we respect them? It doesn't even have to be how do we prop them up, but how do we not disrespect them, right? How do we not be biased against them? How do we not marginalize them? And of course, with species, like, it's perfectly accepted today. This will change, I guarantee it. It's my prediction. We will look back at invasion biology as just an immense error. The same way we look back at other fields that were once well accepted in the scientific community and other communities as errors. But yeah, we'll look back at it, I think, as just an amazing bias and blunder, and deep disrespect for other living beings that have expanded where their homes are, and as a result have failed to see the good things they do especially like immediately blind ourselves to the good things they do. Someone asked me the other day, well, how do you get rid of a knotweed? Just that question alone, right at the outset, like it should be gotten rid of. Obviously, how do you get rid of it? Not oh, like what about knotweed? Like how's it beneficial? Who is it? What does it do? How can we relate to it? Such an intense maligning. And automatically so, like a habitual maligning, right? And he was shocked to hear that it has medicinal properties, that it could potentially be very good against Lyme disease, it has high resveratrol content. It's beneficial for a lot of health reasons, depending on how you take it, that it's edible, it's not poisonous, doesn't cause any rashes or burns. It's just this very like benign plant in terms of direct relationship with humans and with benefits. And that's like he was amazed, like, really, like there's something good about it, and just a basic scientific assessment of a plant like this would start with understanding cost benefit, right? So it would include the benefits, which are never talked about, in terms of in the invasion biology world. If we were honest with ourselves, we'd be doing cost benefits to say, okay, this plant's producing all this oxygen, removing this much carbon, holding this much soil, yada, 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 great for these pollinators, super late nectar for many insects, but it's not good for these insects, and maybe it's taking the place of this and this species, which have these other insects which are losing out, and maybe it's not as good as holding the banks of this species. So here's the negatives. But we would compare them, right? We would do a cost benefit. Just like with so many other manias that now seem to be increasing in the world, unfortunately, darkly so. It seems that's just not even necessary now. You can call yourself a scientist and not even do cost benefit analysis on anything. I mean, this group that's taken upon themselves to attack the knotweed in the Mad River Valley hasn't, as far as I know, even attempted to do a cost benefit in terms of, all right, what's our negative impact? As I mentioned before, driving around, clearly negative, ripping up soil, clearly negative, versus like the best projection, let's say the best output happens from what we do, the best scenario. We've got rid of all the knotweed where we're working, and it becomes all like perfectly beneficial native species, right? So say even if that happens, what's the cost benefit? Is it worth it? And then run it with a few different scenarios where, well, okay, realistically, it's not going to be that successful. I don't think it's going to be successful at all unless it's continuous, which requires continuous energy inputs. But say it's like mid-range success. Okay, what's the cost benefit of that? Like, do the cost benefit analysis. You'd think that would be like square one. You'd have to present that to the public before you start attacking plants on public land, right? Before you start managing public land with no one voting on it. And the whole time, say science, science, science. It's funny, when they said there's no fibrous roots, I kind of was like, really? Like, I thought, well, maybe that could be true. It doesn't change my view on knotweed, but it's like not true at all. Anyway, I hope you guys are all well. Thanks for listening to my rant. I think there's a lot of important things to pay attention to here because it's related to a lot of other things going on in our world. There's the same mentality happening here, and I think we need to call it out. Like whenever we see these war-making processes, we need to stand up for peace and for reconciliation and getting along.